hired foreign nationals who previously worked for Russian state-sponsored news outlets to tell that story. USAGM is a government agency tasked with promoting American ideas. But instead, it's hired foreign adversaries with their tax dollars who promoted anti-American propaganda both at home and abroad. This is only a partisan issue because President Trump is in the White House. The fact is, Republicans and Democrat administrations alike have exposed USAGM's hiring, vetting, and messaging failures. During the Biden era, the State Department Inspector General found that USAGM skirted federal hiring guidelines when doling out jobs to foreign nationals. Many of these foreign nationals were quite literally security risks, yet they were given access to extremely sensitive information. To be specific, what's known as Tier 3 and Tier 5, which are the equivalent of secret and top secret information. Everybody should be asking themselves why foreign nationals hired to be journalists need access to top secret information that most foreign militaries don't get access to. This was not just incompetence, it was taxpayer-funded self-sabotage. American taxpayers would have been better off if that money had just been lit on fire. Before President Trump won his historic second term, USAGM embraced and regurgitated enemy propaganda. It became a mouthpiece for our adversaries, paid for again by your tax dollars. And we're here to say that the grift is over. It's not that USAGM has never provided any value. It's that USAGM had drastically lost their way and allowed themselves to become a source of espionage. However, it's clear that USAGM cannot continue to operate as it has in recent times. Drastic measures have to be taken to ensure that every taxpayer dollar works for where those dollars come from. The American people, not Xi Jinping, not Vladimir Putin, not the Ayatollah. I want to thank our witness, Kari Lake, for appearing in front of this committee today. I'm looking forward to hearing your testimony. I'm looking forward to a productive and probably a rowdy discussion about the Trump administration's vision for the future of U.S. broadcasting. And in that, I'm going to recognize my colleague, Ranking Member Meeks, for any opening statement that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Lake, I thank you for joining us today. First, I'd like to address President Trump's recent strike on Iran's nuclear facilities, an action taken without consulting the Committee or securing congressional authorization. And it's troubling that Secretary Rubio is not sitting here today, and that Republican members are avoiding oversight on such great matters of war and peace that fall squarely on this committee's jurisdiction. Instead, as this hearing's title shows, we're returning to House Republicans' fixation on a call on far-fetched conspiracies, this time to tear down the U.S. Agency for Global Media and the important work it supports. This tracks with President Trump's broad record of denigrating federal agencies and appointing leaders that, far from shepherding their agency's success, are stewards of their sabotage. I believe Ms. Lake, you fall into this category. The story of the United States Agency for Global Media began with the Voice of America countering Nazi propaganda. That mission endured through the Cold War and continues today. USAGM is mandated to reach heavily censored countries with trusted information because Congress recognized that factual reporting contributes to international peace and stability and is in the interest of the United States of America. The irony that USAGM is now being undone under a banner of disinformation is not lost on me. Worse, some Republicans wanted to be transformed into every propaganda machine we oppose abroad. The Trump administration's short-sighted dismantling of USAGM echoes its attack on the U.S. Agency for International Development, spinning false narratives about corruption and waste, dismantling effective institutions Congress established with bipartisan support. Ms. Lake, If it was your goal at USAGM to use falsehood to advance the agenda, I believe that you're qualified for this job. Your opening statement, as I read, is full of false narratives. Aided by Republicans on this committee, who still refuse to release their own investigation transcripts. But the chairman, if your findings are solid, release those transcripts now. The taxpayers who funded this work deserve transparency, not cherry-picked quotes that suit your sham narrative. And again, I ask that the transcripts, all of them, be made publicly so that the public can read and see everything, not cherry-picked citizens. Before tube was fed to the wood chipper, USAGM and its broadcasts were reaching a record 427 million people weekly, delivering objective news to China, Iran, Russia, and other repressive states. Last year, VOA's Persian service recorded 223 million visits to its website, doubling over 4 years. It had 9.8 million social media followers and 1.8 billion Instagram views. Then, Ms. Lake, you put VOA Persian on leave in March, scrambled to restore it in June, when war erupted, and inexplicably, a week later, announced mass fire. So the question is, which is it? Is USAGM and the working support unstoppable waste, as you have said, or is it a critical tool for diplomacy and facts? What you're doing isn't division, it's chaos. The dysfunction lies in the administration's allergy to truth and democracy, the two pillars that USAGM aims to promote abroad. So I'm not surprised by the choice of gut USAGM, since the first Trump administration targeted the enterprise, violating laws and journalistic integrity to shape it into a state media, like Russia or North Korea. Today, those regimes are actually cheering as we surrender another potent set of soft power tools and abandon the airways. The Trump administration, again, chose extremism over facts, tearing down rather than building up our information advantage. Will Congress defend USAGM and free media, or rubber stamp this capitulation to China, Russia, and Iran? Our adversaries are already filling the void. But it's not too late to savage USAGM. Not from itself, as Ms. Lake said, but from this administration's short-sighted activism. With that, I yield back to balance of time.
I thank the ranking member for his comments. I say be careful what you wish for. Ms. Lake has provided binders and binders of information that have been included in her opening statement, so they are in the official record. I'm sure everybody will be looking forward to reading that documentation. Other members of the committee are reminded that opening statements may be submitted for the record. We are pleased to have the senior advisor from the U.S. Agency of Global Media, Ms. Kari Lake, before us today. Your full statements will be made a part of the record, and I'll ask you to keep your spoken remarks to roughly 5 minutes in order to allow time for member questions. And now recognizing Ms. Lake for any opening statement that you may have.
Good morning, and thank you, Chairman Mass, Ranking Member Meeks, and members of this House Foreign Affairs Committee. Thanks for having me. My name is Kari Lake. I'm the Trump Administration Senior Advisor to the U.S. Agency for Global Media. Before I get started, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to let you know this opening statement I delivered is a short version of the longer version that I have submitted to you earlier, and it will also be put into the congressional record. Last December, President-elect Donald Trump called me and asked if I wanted to form the U.S. Agency for Global Media and Voice of America, and I said yes. I was honored and eager to help these institutions tell America's story to the world. But within days in my role as senior advisor, it became increasingly clear that reform was nearly impossible. The agency was incompetent and mismanaged and deeply corrupt, politically biased, and frankly, a serious threat to our national security. USAGM oversees VOA, Office of Cuban Broadcasting and grantees like Radio Free Asia, Radio Free Europe, Middle East Broadcasting Network, Open Technology Fund, and Frontline Media Fund, all of which are 100% funded by hardworking American people. Over the past 15 to 20 years, the agency has become a significant national security risk They hire a shockingly high number of foreign nationals, and they conduct subpar security vetting, so bad that top intelligence agencies revoked this agency's ability to do even the most basic background checks. So many of USAGM's hires come from countries hostile to the United States. Over the decade from 2010 to 2020, Office of Personnel Management and the Office of the Director of National Intelligence repeatedly flagged severe security failures, but USAGM leadership ignored them. They continued to grant journalists and technicians, many from foreign nations, high-level security access based on falsified documents and incomplete background checks, phony names, phony social security numbers. Even after corrective actions were taken in the final months of the Trump administration, these safeguards were reversed by the incoming Biden administration. The scale of the problem is staggering. During the first Trump administration, the political appointees led by CEO Michael Pack got to work fixing it. And they discovered that out of 150 people who were hired during that time period when they weren't doing appropriate vetting, 500 of them were still out there and they could not find them. They went back and re-vetted everybody, but 500 had gone missing. They could not be located for further screening. Foreign employees, social security numbers that are fake and fake names, given top secret access, now missing. That keeps me up at night. My team is working to track them down. Our new security director is working to try to turn this agency around and make it more safer. It's a vast problem that we've uncovered. We've also uncovered that the grantees like Radio Free Europe hired people later identified as foreign spies. At one point, they nearly hired more than 20 spies from a nation hostile to America. Those hires were stopped thanks to a timely tip, and I'm happy to give you more information on that in a secure setting. Voice of America has employed individuals with direct ties to hostile nations. They even once paid paid for somebody who worked previously in Russian media writing anti-American stories to come on the staff and continue to write anti-American stories. At one point, a serious security threat to America, an Office of Cuba Broadcasting Cuba, was declared to be a national security threat. He was fired, thankfully, and he worked there for quite some time. So how do they get so many foreign nationals in? Well, they have used the J-1 visa program, which is a pathway to citizenship intended for exchange students and cultural exchanges, students, camp counselors, and au pairs. It's not intended for journalists, and it's created severe vulnerabilities and frankly displaced many American workers who could fill these jobs. VOA also sidestepped their charter to be reliable, authoritative news, instead being riddled with political bias and outright anti-American sentiment. Examples, you mentioned it, Chairman, refusing to call Hamas terrorists, glamorizing Che Guevara, airing campaign-style videos favoring President Biden, even broadcasting a graphic depicting President Trump with a swastika over his face on the news. I wouldn't want that, by the way, even if it was President Biden. That's totally inappropriate. And a ridiculous editorial firewall prevents agency leadership like myself from correcting any of the bias or having any say in the editorial content that goes on the air. We've also got financial risk management, which I hope we'll go into. $75,000 spent for a COVID study on how Mac computers can be used for social distancing. $100,000 of American taxpayer money to actually sponsor an Afghan cricket team. $400,000 for quid pro quo payments to African VOA affiliates. And they actually wrote quid pro quo next to the budget item. $825,000 for a New York music show and $6 million contract for consulting advice that was never even implemented. I told these stories to people, and many times they say, wow, this place sounds like a crime scene. And I frankly have just learned that it is indeed a crime scene. We've learned that there is an active investigation going on at VOA for a series of threatening phone calls that have been coming out, going after one of your colleagues, a sitting member of Congress, with years' worth of threatening phone calls, and they've discovered that those phone calls were coming from inside the Voice of America. This place is rotten. It's rotten to the core. President Trump has asked me to go in and help clean it up. He's also issued an executive order to reduce this agency down to its mandate, to what is mandated, statutorily required. That's exactly what I'm doing. I don't care if they tell me. We're going to make it right for the American taxpayers. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Lake, for your opening statements. We're now going to move to member questions. Yes, members can questions to 5 minutes. You begin by working down the line. I'll start by recognizing the Chairman Emeritus, Representative McCall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Lake, thanks for being here. Today, I want to thank you for visiting with me in my office to talk about these challenges you outlined. I think the chairman has outlined quite well. I want to commend you for reforming USATM. I think every new administration has the right and responsibility to do so. Your testimony has highlighted systemic problems that must be addressed. More importantly, security lapses, misuse of visas, weak editorial oversight, and much more. I look forward to authorizing this agency, Mr. Chairman, his modernization bill, to correct these abuses. I remember when President Reagan used Voice of America when I was entering college as frontline voices against Soviet oppression. It was the voice of America, not the voice of anti-America. Recently, I used the Voice of America and Open Technology Fund to translate my report of the origins of COVID-19. We disseminated it through neighboring China, broke through the firewall, and went viral, got the attention of the CCP foreign minister, who spoke out against me and the report. That's the kind of impact this agency needs to reach. With the events in Iran, we need America's voice in Iran right now. We need to ensure the Iranian people hear the truth. That we do not intend to harm them, but rather their oppressor, this theocratic regime of the Ayatollah. We need communications inside and outside of Iran. This week, General Vogel, CENTCOM commander, said the voice of America is a critical tool for American security. You've outlined why there are many insecurities. I hope we can go back to that core mission. My dad's war, combating the Nazis. So my question is, Ms. Lake, how are you working to fix Voice of America so it is the voice of America, not anti-America, in Iran, and use the Open Technology Fund to achieve the mission, core mission that Congress intended?
Thank you for that question, and thank you for laying out when it was a better agency. You're right, Robert Reagan used to be a great broadcaster, one of the great communicators, and we used it, but times have changed, and it's still doing 1990s style television in a world where people are getting their information right here on their smartphones. It's in the back pocket. And so we need to update and modernize it. But President Trump's executive order dated March 14th has called for this agency to be brought to a statutory minimum. And I'm glad that you mentioned Iran, because one of the languages that is required in the statute is Farsi, and we are still broadcasting in Farsi. And Chairman, Ranking Member Madam Leaks said that we have not been, and that we, in a panic, started to put news out in Farsi. That is actually not true. We were in the process of effectuating President Trump's executive order. And in the process of doing that, several malicious lawsuits were started up, and the judge froze us from being able to get news on. We literally were frozen in place because of all of these lawsuits. Once we were free to start putting news on, we immediately went to what the statutory minimum is, and one of the languages is Farsi going into Iran. And I'm very proud to say that when President Trump, when the bombings happened over the weekend on Saturday, when President Trump started to speak, we had a crew in on Saturday, delivering President Trump's message to the people of Iran in Farsi. It was translated and it went out. Sometimes lean and mean and a smaller staff makes it easier to get things done. And in one of the emails that I got from our Persian team, they actually said that. They were able to move quicker because we're smaller, the blow had been diminished. And I'm really proud that we got that out. We're going to continue to operate at the statutory minimum. We are putting out content in Pashto, Dari, Mandarin, Farsi, and Spanish through Office of Human Broadcast.
All right, I thank you for that response. I think it's very important right now that the Iranian people hear the American story. an American message, and I commend you for your efforts to perform. And I encourage you to get that message into Iran right now. Communication inside and out is so important for those people if they're going to rise up against suppressive theocracy that we've endured since 1979. I yield that.
That's Ranking Member Meeks.
Mr. Chairman, let me first enter to the record that you and I received, Mr. Chairman, from 4 bipartisan members of the International Broadcasting Advisory Board, which Congress established and confirmed in 2023. Ms. Lake, you may recall the White House fired the board members earlier. Let me just first say this, because I do agree with this report on the need of making sure that the voice of America in those places where our adversaries have false information going through. But you cannot do that simply by reducing and ending all individuals that work within the agency. So, these board members, for example, that were fired, despite their political and policy differences, those members wrote, and I quote, defunding, as you have done, these networks, because you can't do anything without money, but defunding these networks at this critical moment will undermine the United States efforts to counter the biased narratives from America's authoritarian competitors. It's crucial. Some have said that it seems as though that our adversaries under this administration have been considered or treated like they're our allies. And our allies have been treated as though they're our adversaries. Now, I agree with the experts that put this letter in. There are grave risks right now for the United States national security posed by dismantling USAGM and the broadcasters it supports. Now, one of the things I want to do, maybe we can do this and it's kind of save some time. I serve on the Financial Services Committee also, where we often engage with companies about the risk analysis that they perform for making major business decisions that outpace their competitors. And I know I hear my Republican colleagues often say that government should be run like a business. I just want to try to just get a few yes or no questions in the time that we have, just so that I know we can either get some of the information that the chairman said we are already brought with you. So my question to you is, did you conduct or review a written analysis before placing most of the USAGM's and DOA's employees on administrative leave on March 15th, before cutting off payments to USAGM grantees in March, or before announcing a reduction in force at the DOA last Friday? Yes, sir.
I've been working in Maine for 30 years, and in every newsroom across this country in that
Yes,
time,
sir. Did you do?
these are complex questions and not instruments.
International.
We are right-sizing an agency that has grown and
Did you
grown.
do a review?
She's
We
local
are
news.
looking,
Not even international.
We have a record
How often you write about Afghanistan?
we reviewed the number of employees, the number of languages, but most of all, what we reviewed was an executive order, March 14th, by the man who's in charge.
Do you have, I want to know, do you have a record that you can produce? The chairman said you have a bunch of things with, do you have a record of what you review and who you review to?
We reviewed the
Do
statute.
you have a record? Yes or no?
We have the statute. and
Do you have a record?
The statute.
Yeah, we have it.
That statute.
But if you have another statute, a record of individuals that you reviewed, interviewed, or talked to before you committed your actions.
No,
Of
baby.
dismantling.
I talked to a lot of people at the agency.
Do you have a record of that?
You can go back and look at emails.
Do you have a record?
You want me to pull emails?
I want you to show the record of what you did, Ms. Lake.
Well, you can.
Don't just give me something that's not verified. Tell me, show me the record, because that's what I get often got in the business, you have to have a record. Show me the record that you did what you did. That's all. And I mean,
That's right.
did you survey, let me ask this question. Did you survey employees
No.
that was there about race, fraud, and abuse you believe was occurring in the agency? Did you survey?
We know that there's waste, fraud, and abuse.
Did you survey the employees? Yes or no? Yes or no?
These are ridiculous.
Did
No.
you serve, simple answer.
They
You
don't.
did or you didn't?
No.
I guess survey means talk.
Did you do it or not?
Sure, we did.
You did? Then you can provide those surveys. You can show us a record of who
We
you
did
talked
not
to.
run an expensive survey, but I've talked to many people at this agency.
You didn't do that, so this was based on what?
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Great.
Well, thank you for your 5
You're
minutes
not
of question.
reporter. You don't know
Now we
international
recognize
broadcasting.
Representative Stick. 5 minutes of question.
You know little. You work at us also.
I am chair of the Congressional Executive Commission on China. We've had many hearings and worked on legislation. One of those that passed just a few weeks ago was to combat the heinous practice of forced organ harvesting, where 50, 70,000 young people, average age 28, get their organs taken with weakeners and polymer practitioners. It has 406 to 1, second time it passed last year as well. Had 4 hearings on it. Xi Jinping is committing atrocities like almost no one else in the world. And whether it be what he's done to Hong Kong, a pervasive use of torture, religious persecution, everywhere you look, genocide against the Uyghurs, and then in your testimony, and I would ask if you could maybe elaborate on this, you point out that the past leadership of VOA and Mandarin Language Services conducted annual meetings with the Chinese embassy in Washington. Well, I go to the Chinese embassy myself, outside, and I've been trying to Chinese leaders here from the embassy and from the government many times, testified, every time they turn us down. But if you could elaborate on those meetings, whatever you can tell us. You also pointed out that VOA's Mandarin Language Service personalities have hosted events at the Chinese embassy, and one of VOA's television editors even publicly pledged his allegiance to the PRC at a Chinese embassy event. And finally, you said VOA allowed the Communist Vietnamese and Chinese embassies in D.C. to pressure them into removing videos, cutting short live interviews, or changing story angles so that coverage was more supportive of the Chinese government and white population. Can you elaborate on that?
I'd be happy to. I just actually read an article that was very interesting. It's called Chinese Influence at Voice of America. And it mentioned that there's a firewall, editorial firewall, that members of the management at USAGM and Voice of America cannot tell the reporters what to report. They can't talk about what should be in the newscasts. And so if a reporter decides to go rogue and do pro-CCP coverage, I can't do anything about it. That's not how a newsroom should be run. I worked in newsrooms my whole life. There's always some editorial control that management has, and you're making sure that what goes out on the airway is accurate. And frankly, in an agency such as this, it should be telling America's story. That's our charter, telling America's story, being authoritative, not telling China's story. But I want to talk to you a little bit about what you just mentioned. If I may read this, because it was really shocking when I read this. And sorry, I don't have my reading glasses on for this one, guys. Starting in the first decade of the 2000s, the Chinese embassy in Washington, D.C., and the leadership of VOA's Mandarin service began an annual meeting to allow embassy officials to voice their opinions about VOA's content. So, management at USAGM has no say in the content that goes on, but the folks over at the CCP and the Chinese embassy do have say about what goes on our air. CCP embassy officials have also reached out to VOA hosts to convince them to be more supportive of the regime. VOA personalities have hosted events at the embassy. VOA TV editor, one of them, publicly pledged his allegiance to China at a Chinese embassy event. This is absurd. This is insane. The American taxpayers are footing the bill for this. You know, they also ran a 2-minute CCP propaganda. They produced it at VOA. And the management agreed that it was CCP propaganda. Frankly, 2 seconds of CCP propaganda is too much. The American people are footing the bill. So things have to change there. We need to make sure that firewall is gone. We should be able to have control over what kind of content goes out. It should be in alignment with our foreign policy. And unfortunately, the only people that seem to have any influence are our adversaries on what is going out on VOA's airwaves. It's outrageous and it has to stop. And thankfully, President Trump issued that executive order to bring this agency down to its statutory minimum. And he has called for this agency to be eliminated starting in fiscal year 2026.
Thank you for your testimony. Thank you for highlighting that simplicity that the Chinese government is playing. You know, I'm barred from going to China. I used to lead human rights missions here frequently. Global Times put me on their so-called hit list. And I can tell you, you know, I can't go to China, and yet we have people collaborating with their top leadership here in D.C. and elsewhere. And that is outrageous. We need to reform this. And
The judge of analyze enemies. We've got good enemies.
thank
We
you
have
for
6 minutes of editorial.
Representative Gilfett, Representative Hughes, now recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for being here. I think if we look at Exhibit A in terms of the value of global media, you look no further than Iran. Our administration took great attention towards the bombing that occurred, but to really be successful, it's going to be necessary. It's not just strong diplomacy, but changing the views of the people that live there. And Secretary Rubio in his Senate confirmation stressed that there's probably no greater discrepancy between actions of one government and their people than Iran. And even before this action, before the war, 6.6 million Iranians, 10% of the adult population, got their news from FARA, Radio Free Network in the state. It's produced an agency that you sought to terminate the contracts at a time when it's needed more than ever. Cutting transmission feeds from the Middle East Broadcasting Network resulted in 90% of those actions, 90% of the staff being cut. Some of the people on Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, are furloughed. Programming has been reduced at a time when we need it the most. I'm concerned also, not just with the cuts, but I'm concerned for the journalists that report this news.
That's right.
They're in great jeopardy. A lot of attention in your opening remarks went to vetting and extreme efforts that you're doing for vetting. I want to know what you're doing to protect those journalists.
That's right.
One just recently released the other day after 4 years of detainment by the Russians. Talk about the way he was tortured, physically abused, psychologically abused. These are journalists that are there. These are people trying to bring the word of democracy to people that have not. What are you doing to support these journalists? What attention? I didn't notice it in your opening remarks. That should be first and foremost. What are you doing to protect these people?
I agree. I think the safety and security of journalists is very important. I was a journalist in my past profession, and so it's critically important. I don't think that they've done enough to protect them. I'm thankful that recently, in the last few days, one journalist who's being held was released thanks to President Trump. And, you know, I think you need to ask RFE, Radio Free Europe, what they're doing to protect their employees. I just got the agency 3 months ago, and what the question is.
I would like to know, if I may, reclaiming my time, not reclaiming my time. I'm reclaiming my time, Mr. Chairman. You know, it's sort of like blaming the group that's advocating for these people. What are they doing? I'll tell you what they're doing. They simply asked for a meeting with you
It's hard
to discuss this issue. I have a letter that you put in the record from President of Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, President of Radio Free Asia, the President of Middle East Broadcasting Networks, dated April 30th, simply asking for some kind of communications or meeting with you regarding these issues of detainment. I'd also like to put into the record an article that's the audience in Iran and the Middle East surge as funding for Fatah and Laura of Israel is in jeopardy. If you look at what's happening, And you look what happened since the bombing occurred and since the war occurred, you just see dramatic increases in the listenership. Just proving how vital this is to people that aren't getting other messages. Radio 5 traffic surged 344%. The Instagram account, 62.5 million increases, rise of 77%. These are things that are necessary, and you are cutting the grievance. Thank goodness the courts are saying no to you. But why would you ever want to do this here? Why do you better say, I want to know what Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty is doing to protect the journalists, when the U.S. and you have a role in doing it, and you won't even take a meeting from the people that want to meet and discuss the dangers to these journalists. I hope that you will take that meeting and get a confirmation from you at NBC that you will meet them soon and discuss this issue. People's lives are in danger trying to tell the truth. I yield back.
If they would drop their malicious laws, then I'd be happy to meet with them. It would be really stupid to meet with someone who's suing you. And, you know, this is a gentleman who makes up $320,000 off the backs of hardworking Americans. And it's.
Madam, I just want to take that. Are we talking about officials making money off the backs of America when we have a commander-in-chief taking the money he's making? So I don't, that doesn't wash. I'm already used to that.
Gentleman goes back. Gentleman's time has expired. This is submitted for the record. I was glancing through it, just FYI, I'm going to keep reading it, but I don't actually see a request for a meeting with Ms. Lake in the letter as was referenced. Bring to her attention no request for a meeting in this letter, but I'll let you know if that changes as I read through it. Representative Perry is now recognized.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Lake, would you care to answer the question for the last question?
Well, I think it is difficult to meet with people when they're suing you. It just isn't advised. If any attorney would tell you you can't sit down and meet with somebody who's launched malicious lawsuits against the agency, naming me in those lawsuits. So it'd be ill-advised to do that, obviously. You know, we do not have a current grant agreement with RFE, Radio Free Europe, which was started, you know, many years ago as a CIA operation. And we don't have a current grant agreement with them. We've been asking them to work with them, negotiate a grant agreement, and they refuse. We offered a grant to them, and they refused to even mark it up and redline it and send it back to us. So we don't have an approved financial plan. They won't tell us where they're spending their money. We've got an audit going on right now, and we're stonewalled and preventing us from getting any access to their financial books. Again, we pay them, and they do not tell us where the money is going. I think that's a problem. I think the American people deserve to know where their money is going. And so we're working to make sure we get that. Interestingly, in the 11th hour last night, right before I crawled in bed, we found out that they're finally going to give a little bit of information to our auditors. I thought it was really interesting timing because they didn't want me to sit up here and say they refuse to let us look at their books. They refuse to let us see where the American taxpayer dollars are going and once it's getting funneled into RFERL. And if they really, you know, we pay them every month, by the way, so if they're not protecting the journalists, it's on them. If they're not putting out broadcasting, it's on them. We've paid them every month because the judges ordered us to, and so it's on them if they're not putting out broadcasting.
So like, this is clearly an agency that is run amok. I wouldn't characterize it as treason, but it sounds like it's certainly seditious. Are you familiar with the Wire Woods report?
I'm very familiar, and it's in one of these binders, and it was an incredible report looking at some of the mismanagement, misuse of funds, and other outrageous things that were happening at the same
To
time.
that end, I just want to inform you that I struggled mightily, probably for about 6 months in this committee and in Congress to have that entered into the congressional record so that the American people could see the misuses of their money and the seditious activity by an agency they were paying for. And I think as part of that, 40% of the workforce at that time was improperly vetted, and USAGM lost their ability to conduct security clearances, but continued to conduct them for 10 years after which they had lost their ability to conduct security clearances, and that the use of J-1 visas to hire foreign journalists and technical staff without systematic review resulted in propaganda that was favorable to adversaries and enemies as opposed to the United States of America, with American tax dollars, paid for with American tax dollars. Now, somebody might say, well, that was a mistake, and yeah, that was a misstep, but it seems to me this was an orchestrated plan by someone at USAGM. And so my question begins with, have we determined from the McGuire Woods report or any of your investigation at this point, who, by name, authorized this activity over that long period of time, and these people antithetical to the United States of America, who did that, and what accountability has been put in place? What prosecutions have happened as a result of that? What accountability has taken place, if any?
Sadly, there hasn't been any accountability. That McGuire Woods report was done in the waning days of President Trump's first term. Michael Patton was the CEO, and he helped make that possible. He saw, the first day on the job, he got dropped on his desk this issue with 1,500 employees had not been properly screened. And he said, this is a real big problem. ODNI was saying, you got a serious problem over there. You guys are freelancing on your security screenings and you're allowing dangerous people into our country. And so they got busy investigating how this was happening. They put people on administrative leave, and before they could do anything and fire people had left that were being investigated. When the Trump administration ended and Biden went into office and replaced the leadership at this agency, they rehired all of those people back.
So let me, and I don't mean to cut it off, but I got a limited amount of time. Of course, this is completely outrageous, but why should anybody in this country, anybody in this committee, anybody in Congress believe that this agency, this operation should continue to exist and won't return to its former operations and activities beyond the Trump administration and beyond your tenure? Why should anybody believe that?
They shouldn't believe it, and I think this is why President Trump wants to eliminate the agency. If the agency itself is not needed, it's proven that it does not know how to manage and does not know how to be respectful of this country and the American taxpayers' dollars. And so I think President Trump is absolutely right in eliminating this agency. We can roll in things that are valuable, that are worthwhile, bring it under the Department of State, where it once was, by the way, Voice of America. Back when it was effective, back when many of you talk about the glory days of Voice of America, it was under the Department of State, where there were guardrails on what the story of America was being told. It wasn't anti-American, it was in line with our foreign policy. I think that's where Congress should end up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields, your time expired. Chair now recognizes Representative Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to enter into the record a letter dated yesterday from the president of the News Guild, just asking this committee to take a look and make sure that the funds that are supposed to be restored actually get restored to the authorities. Here's what bothers me about this. Reforms are fine and so forth, but I agree with my good friend from Texas, the chairman emeritus, Mr. Paul, about the importance of having tools like the open technology that can translate, use internet, use Instagram, et cetera, to get out there and get our message to places like China. So I agree with Chairman Smith. We've got to speak to the Chinese people about what's happening with the people population. We've got to have those tools. So eliminating those tools wholesale make us weaker as a country. That is a problem. In fact, our Secretary of State had an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal back in 2018 talking about how important what Radio Free Asia does is in exposing China's campaign against the people. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to enter that op-ed into the record. So here's a challenge. The ranking member raised, I think, what is a very important issue. We can debate, whether this should say an independent agency come back into the State Department or not, but the wholesale way of dismantling this agency, I think the chairman asked a legitimate question: what was the strategy? What was there a methodical approach to looking at the agency? What was effective? What was not effective? What should we be doing? What should we not be doing? Just like, can you provide kind of that methodical approach in terms of how the administration, how you looked at, what essentially is a dismantling of this agency?
Yeah, we actually got to work after the 14th of March, and we put people on administrative leave and assessed what the statutory
We
minimum
provide us
was.
documentation of that, so we can do our job.
I mean, in meetings and in discussions, we can talk
Yeah, the
about
minutes of those meetings and, yeah, the documentation.
emails and things of such.
That's all stuff that we can take a look at as a committee, as we do oversight. Again, I'm not against modernizing the agency, I'm not against looking at things. The challenge, Mr. Keating touched on, you know, we're in the middle of, what is the war in the Middle East? Hopefully this ceasefire holds. Hopefully the Iranian people rise up and demand a better future. You know, I reserve judgment on the president's actions. I do want the administration to come brief us on what they're thinking, how this is unfolding. But absolutely, right now, we need all of our tools to communicate to the Iranian people. We need, to do that through the radio, through the internet, through Instagram. I'm not a big TikTok fan, I support TikTok fan, but folks are getting information on TikTok. We've got to be using that as well. I am very concerned that the personnel have been laid off, that we're working with the shoestrings and staff. That is making us weaker and less effective at a moment of vulnerability to the Iranian regime, where this could be a time when Iranian people choose to take a different path forward. What I would like to do, and what I'd like a commitment to do, and I'd ask the chairman for this, is there was a time on this committee where we actually did do reform. When I was a freshman member of Congress under Chairman Ed Royce, at that time ranking member Elliot Engel, we actually did do a bipartisan reform bill that I believe passed this committee unanimously and moved forward. That's our job. It's like, you should be working with us. We should not be dismantling an agency that we've seen over history has been super effective, whether it was in World War II, combating the Nazis in the Cold War, going against the oppressive Russian or Soviet Union, the Communist Party. What I think the administration is doing, how they've approached this, is making us weaker. And this is not a systematic way of thinking about how you reform and modernize things. I'd love to see the records, the minutes, the emails, so we can actually do our job in oversight. And I'd love for you to work, Mr. Chairman, for us to work together in a bipartisan way to say, okay, in the 21st century, we do need tools to combat the propaganda that our enemies are putting out there. We do need to hire the best folks. We do need to have all that. Again, it's like, I'd love your commitment to work with this committee, work with Congress to enact those reforms and share the information and what you're thinking.
Absolutely, it would be wonderful to work with you and to effectuate the president's executive order to reduce this agency down in size so that it's lean, mean, and effective. And I think it is effective. We were able to get information out into, and translated into Farsi as to what was happening. We were able to get President Trump's address translated live as it was happening. You don't need a massive staff. This is the only newsroom in the world that hasn't seen cutbacks, because we don't need to have massive newsrooms.
Right now, what I worry about though is we've let go of all the staff, and it isn't happening, it's only happening.
We haven't let go of all the staff, actually.
Gentleman's
By the way, can I just mention something? I want to show you the newsroom, one of the newsrooms on our VOA. I don't know if you can see this. Empty, it's kind of a Where's Waldo, can you spot the one person in there?
Not from here.
One person in the newsroom. And I know you're probably saying, yeah, thanks a lot, Kari. This was actually back in the Biden administration. I didn't hear any complaints coming from anybody when nobody was showing up for work at VOA. When one person was showing up in the middle of the week, one person showed up. And nobody on this committee, no Democrat said, why is there only one person in that newsroom? We need to get more people in the newsroom to get the story out. Nobody showed up for work. And now that we are actually right-sizing an agency that has been very out of control and has never been right-sized, newsrooms all across this country. Mr. Chair?
Now I'm going to recognize myself for 5 minutes of questioning.
Mr. Chairman, you mentioned consent for clarification. Is that the little COVID, by the way?
This was last November, so I think COVID was over.
Good question. The elections were, maybe it had something to do with the election.
I don't think you wanted to in there if there was elections, the middle of the week in November.
They're gonna work from home because of moving. There's no space for everybody.
But I know this newsroom was ready to attack President Trump. They were doing ads for Joe Biden. They were literally running Joe Biden ads. and it's asking President Trump.
Well, Mr. Keating just wanted a moment to ask a question, so I think she's responding to that. You're welcome to give her time. You're welcome for giving more time to your son. Appreciate you more questions.
Mr. Chairman, like the gentleman, I have a clarification question. If it was the middle of November, then to the gentleman's point, it was after President Trump had won, and those people were out because they were in mourning, because they were so partisan that they wanted to not be there. And I think he made a very good point on that, Joe.
Can I actually just,
I am actually going to recognize myself for 5 minutes, not as much as this fun exercise with everybody. I would make the point that, radio free is not free. And I was just thinking about this in my office the other day, and I was like, what's the most common media in America on the radio? I think it's iHeartRadio, iHeartMedia. The entire budget for iHeartMedia across the breadth of the United States of America and the globe is $90 million. That's the entire budget. For Radio Free Europe, $150 million. Significantly more than all of iHeartMedia. For Radio Free Asia, $70 million. For Middle East broadcasting, $103 million. You think of all of those individually, and you compare that to iHeartMedia across America, and you look at the reach of that. I just think it's an interesting note as we point out the need to downsize the size and scope of what's going on in USAGM. I did want to do my questions right now because I wanted to touch a little bit on what Representative Perry had spoken about with that IG report, but I am very surprised that nobody touched off on this on either side of the aisle. It was just said by you in your opening remarks that there's a member of Congress targeted by somebody inside of USAGM. Does that mean you were tracking their IP address, or they were emailing people, or they were phone calls? How do you track that? What do you mean?
Well, you have to ask the Capitol Police, and the ones that we doing the investigation, and it's an active investigation, but from my understanding, somebody was calling a beloved member of Congress, who's actively in Congress right now. And I'm gonna let you guess. With the bias you've seen at this agency, just take a wild guess.
Can you say the name of the individual that conducted this?
I think I would prefer to withhold that. Maybe you can talk away from this, because I don't want to sabotage the investigation.
Will you keep us updated on it as the investigation
Well,
goes on?
what I've learned is that over the course of 2 years, I believe starting in roughly October of 2023, right up until January of 25, threatening phone calls were being made to citizens of Congress. And through the course of their investigation, they figured out where those calls were. I don't know how our investigators figured that out, but they have ways, and they found out that the phone calls to the sitting member of Congress, threatening calls were coming from inside the area.
Thank you for sharing that. We look forward, I'm sure all of us on both sides, to hearing more information about this. I want to get to the questions about the IG reports. And it's something that I spoke about in my opening statements. Individuals hired on, improperly vetted, some of these agencies asking for their own skips, their own secure places to view classified information, and not literally always being given security clearances, but given access to secret and top secret information. It's amazing to me to think that journalists were given what we might not give allied militaries. That to me is a very interesting thing to think about. But when you say we couldn't find 500 of these individuals, you mean somewhere in the government, you went to go look for who are these people that you consider suspect, and now they pulled a Kaiser Sose and we can't see them anywhere? What's going on?
Sadly, yes. About 1,500 people went through this shoddy vetting, which I think could have been intentionally shoddy, and because they knew there were problems. This is no fingerprints, aliases.
No FBI fingerprints or something like that.
Some of the times the FBI fingerprints were taken and not submitted. Sometimes they were not taken at all. And then they were given PIN cards, which is the access card you need to get into buildings and offices. It's actually a very secure way of keeping our offices and our departments. And
Somebody's hired by America, they have a direct deposit. They have, like you said, an ID card to get into a building. If they're global media, they might have a passport to travel on behalf of the United States of America. The fact that you're saying these individuals cannot be found is a staggering statement.
Not only can they not be found, and we've asked for help with other agencies to try to track them down. We even asked the Doge guys. You know, these are young guys who have a way of kind of looking into things, and they said, I think we can find
high
it.
school
They
graduates.
tried.
They use aliases? I mean, they use fake names?
Yes.
Okay. Did they have social security numbers, or were they foreigners?
Foreigners with no social security numbers, so they're given, just a notional number was put in on these forms. They had forms that were not filled out. I mean, this is a massive security failure in a level that should keep you up at night.
I want to ask you one more question.
And they could be working, by the way.
I want to get to one more question before my time expires. Like you said, you were a big part of media in your prior roles. Did you ever have a TS or SCI clearance, or did you ever get to go into a SCIF as a member of the media?
Local reporter,
Thank you.
of course.
I now recognize.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Lake, for being here. I do
It's
want to
an
be
international
concerned
podcast.
about the role that media plays, especially since, as recently as a few months ago, there were over 427 million people who are actually being exposed to VOA. And VOA is usually one of the best places that we can provide factories information to audiences, especially in China and Japan, especially the escalation. I speak PhD first, I'm going to give you the opportunity. I do believe, I speak PhD first, I'm going to give you the opportunity. I do believe that foreign affairs, especially when it comes to national security, should be a partisan issue. I do believe that. And I'm going to give you the opportunity to just explain. Because as one of my colleagues mentioned, there was a letter in April, and they said it happened every year. And in this letter, they're saying that they tried to meet with you, and that Ms. Lake has not spent a single minute with us, senior team. She has not visited our office or inspected our operations. And so with this letter that we have here at 47, I also want to bring to your attention where it says also that they're still open to meeting with you. I know now you're saying we can't meet with them, but I want to get more clarification. Within the 2 weeks that you were in your position, that you were clear that it was, you said specifically that's largely incompetent, corrupt, biased, and threat to America's national security. What were the procedures in place for you to make that determination? Specifically, how much staff was actually allocated to do that investigation to help you come to that conclusion?
Well, we've got reports, we've got years of biased reporting, we have misused funds.
Can you tell me about the step or the mechanisms that you use? How much staff was provided to look into it in those 2 weeks?
How much staff was what?
How many staff? What was your mechanisms that actually go for to come to this conclusion within 2 weeks?
Within 2 weeks, I assessed all of the grant agreements, and I realized that these grant agreements had been changed during the Biden administration to take out any form of transparency. During the first Trump administration, the grants were written, the grant agreements were written, where we had transparency, you could see what was being spent, and during the Biden administration, they took all of that transparency out, and they were signing a $250 million lease on a high-rise building, saddling the American people with paying for it, and it wasn't even equipped to do broadcasting.
Well, I'm happy you mentioned transparency, because that's what I'm trying to get also. Now, when you spoke to them, you had anybody speak to them, was there a conversation about accountability and transparency? I think that's what we're trying to get to. What was the mechanism in place to come to these conclusions? And before the lawsuit was filed and these letters were sent, was there anybody who went to them to ask questions and hold them accountable?
It's really hard to create open communication when you're being sued.
Well, before that, because we have letters back until April, this one is in June. So before any lawsuits were filed, were there any attempts to have?
I believe when I first got there, they reached out to me. I had just gotten in the building and said we'd like to meet. And before I even had a chance to clear my schedule and meet with them, they launched into a malicious lawsuit. So no, we haven't met with them.
If you can submit any communications that your office has had, I would really appreciate that. And my second question is, I do believe in lean machines that work well. What are your matrices that you have in place to determine that the leanness is actually being beneficial and that this leanness is not creating a vacuum in which now we're not being able to exercise our strongest power, which is our soft power, and our diplomacy?
Well, that's one thing if it's used properly, but it hasn't been used properly. We laid out that the CCP has more say in the editorial content we have.
I have 43 seconds. I want to know what your matrices are. What are the points that you're using to determine that this is actually benefiting, that this machine is working, versus adversely hurting us and creating a vacuum in which any other group can come in and put out propaganda? And we know there's a lot of propaganda, especially coming through the internet. So I want to make sure that we actually have a plan in place, there's funding in place, or that there are matrices in place to determine that this late creation of the machine is actually working for us and not
That's
against us.
what our goal is. We want to make sure any information going out is not anti-American, is not racist.
Is there a matrices, could you please provide it to us so we can understand information?
I wish we did have some say over what information is going on, but unfortunately, because of this firewall, this place could go totally rogue. This place could go and put 100% pro-CCP information. They could side with the regime in Iran, and we couldn't do a thing about it. They could run an attack. You couldn't do anything about it.
The young lady's time
I
is
just want to
expired.
say, if you, thank you, just one second, so I can say this is very.
The young lady has 5 minutes.
I thank you for being here. This is really the budget for us working together and coming together and negotiating how can we move forward. Right now, we're at a critical juncture when we see more of our hostilities, especially in these areas. And so we want the answers to these questions so we can work together.
Thank you. The young lady's time has really expired.
Thank you.
The gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Based on the previous conversation on the security clearances, I'm going to go to Iran, back to Iran. In June of this year, you restarted broadcast to Iran after Israel attacked them. In the meantime, Musk has said that the beams are on with Starlink into Iran. Industry estimates that there are 20,000 terminals. You have to have the terminal yet. They're still testing themselves. Operating in Iran through the black market channels. So I want to compare the two. Approximately how many Iranians currently watch the VOA urgent service?
Probably not that many, to be honest. The ratings aren't particularly good. I don't know if you've ever had a chance to sit down and watch a VOA programming. It's painful to watch.
The RFE and RL have claimed that they reach millions of Iranians. So obviously, given the response, how are we going to support broadcasting to Iran? This is the bottom line. I'll jump over some of this because I think it's not going to be answerable. What format do you see going into the most constrained countries? How are we going to do that? Because technology is changing fast. So, you know, we can call it radio, free, whatever, but how do you plan to get pro-American, the American story into the most denied countries? We'll start with that.
You know, I think Starlink is a great option. A lot of people mention OTF, and that's the way to go, but to be honest, they're behind the times. You know, they're looking at VPNs. And when a dictator turns off the internet, good luck. I mean, you gotta have a way to get information in. I think that Starlink is a great option. I'd like to see Starlink moving a little bit faster into Iran. So we have an opportunity right now to let the people of Iran know that we don't have a problem with the people of Iran. They're incredible people. They have been mistreated for many decades. And we want to make sure that they know that America is a friend.
Yeah, I think high tech, you need to be examining how you're going to get around the government. How are you going to actually get the beam into the country, into the United States?
I will say though, with our programming that we put out on Saturdays, I think it was the most watch we've ever put into the varsity. And it was through modes of people were actually seeing it, and they were watching. So they're very in tune with what's happening in America.
They are, but the government will then respond and cut it off if possible. So you've got to stay one step ahead. This is the age-old, how do you stay ahead of the adversary? So what obstacles do you see in today's climate in getting into the big four, Russia, China, North Korea, what obstacles do you see and how do you plan to overcome them with this new organization that you are going to be developing?
Well, we want to continue to put information that is accurate to the folks who know. So as I mentioned, we're reaching for languages, actually Pashto, Dari, Mandarin, Farsi, and in Cuba as well. And it's difficult. You know, we're still using radio and Radio Marti in South Florida. That seems to be working, but we're not reaching that many people with this. I think we have to examine if it's worth the money that's going into this to to be not reaching that many people. There's other ways to reach people than, like I said, 1990s style television.
Information into these countries. It is a great help. It helped them under the Soviet Union, the United countries. We've got to do that. My time has expired. Thank you very much for your answer.
Thank you, gentleman from Arizona.
Thank you very much, Mr.
Thank you, gentleman from Arizona.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Ms. Lake, your actions as senior advisor are, you lost fair and square. Instead of conceding, you embarrassed yourself and our state by lying again and again for years, blaming everything under the sun for your loss, except for your own toxic politics. You lied about that election to this very day. You lied about signatures on mail-in ballots not matching those on file. Proven wrong. You lied about ballots being intentionally misprinted and then rejected. BS. You lied and said hundreds of thousands of ballots were mishandled. Zero evidence. You claimed fake ballots were snuck into batches before they were counted. Come on. You repeated these lies again and again, and you said even recently, quote, I am the duly elected governor, they just stole it, unquote. Give me a break. This Lake requires you to tell the truth. For decades, whenever authoritarians and dictators suppress the people and claim victory in fraudulent election, voice of America those lies. I can't imagine how people fighting for democracy around the world can trust someone who has so shamelessly lied about her own election. This Lake, no, I'm not. This Lake, to regain a semblance of your credibility. I'm not guilty. This Lake, to regain a semblance of your credibility. All right, I did not yield, and I let the time left. Ms. Lake, to regain a semblance of your credibility, are you finally ready to admit you lost the 2022 Arizona election?
It saddens me that you are from Arizona and you're okay with.
It's a yes or no question, Ms. Lake.
That you are from Arizona.
I think it's the answer is no, reclaim my time.
The gentleman will suspend and stop the clock. For all present, members are reminded to avoid engaging in personality for the president and other members. Okay, and this is a member of the administration, so I would caution all to stay on the subjects and stay off of personality. Please, you never make a change.
Yes, and in this case, these are adjudicated lies. Courts of law have determined that these are lies. These are not me saying it. You didn't just lie to the press. You took those lies to court and lost again and again. Every one of your lawsuits failed. And a federal judge said that you were furthering false narratives that blamelessly undermine public trust. And you didn't just, you were formally sanctioned by the court. Ms. Lake, you have been sanctioned twice for providing false information to courts. Isn't that true, yes or no?
I was brave enough to fight our body elections, and the courts have not caught up.
That was a yes or no. I guess the answer is no. I'm going to reclaim my time. You have been sanctioned by both the United States District Court and the Arizona Supreme Court for, quote, making false factual statements to the court. And you were sued for defamation by a Republican election official, Stephen Wisher. He and his family were subjected to harassment and even death threats because of those lies. You told your supporters, Richard and fellow Republican County Supervisor Bill Gates, that they, quote, sabotaged Election Day. You accused them of deliberately printing the wrong image on ballots to jam tabulators and injecting hundreds of thousands of phony ballots. What a joke. And here's the thing, Ms. Lake. When it came down to it, you chickened out. You refused to defend those lies in court. You decided to take a default judgment. You are an adjudicated liar and a two-time political